operating on teenager time.
What was that?
You know, say Jediah's operating on teenager time.
Yeah.
Well, and Carth's sick. And I don't think Candace's gonna make it for Bible class this morning.
Yeah, Bethany's gonna bring the cold weather with her.
Looks like it.
Yeah.
Looks like it.
She said she comes in on Friday.
On Friday, yeah.
That's the day the weather, cold
Yeah.
weather comes in.
I know. Yeah, Dwight's coming in on Tuesday. And then she comes in on Friday. And yeah, Friday is the day that we see the, the last time it was this cold, there's actually, half an inch thick ice on
We
the,
got to 2 inches.
2 inches on the pond down there. That was 5 years ago. So we'll see what it's like. We have had a thin layer of ice on the pool water already this year, back with that other cold snap, but this one's gonna be a little bit deeper, I think. So, anyway, I guess we better start Bible class here. All right, we're in 1 Peter chapter 2, and we're going to start on verse 13 today. Remembering that the whole basis of 1 Peter is he's addressing the Christian life, but its foundation is always that living hope that we have through Christ's resurrection from the dead. And that reality flavors every aspect of our lives, that we're living as people who are going to live forever in heaven through Christ. And right now, he then says, okay, in the verses immediately preceding where we're going to pick up today, he says, okay, don't forget, now you're strangers in a foreign land. That's all you are. You belong, your citizenship is elsewhere. And so on that, he builds here in verse 13, be subject for the Lord's sake to every human institution, whether it be to the emperor as supreme or to governors as sent by him to punish those who do evil and to praise those who do good. For this is the will of God, that by doing good you should put to silence the ignorance of foolish people. Live as people who are free, not using your freedom as a cover-up for evil, but living as servants of God. Honor everyone, love the brotherhood, fear God, honor the emperor. So he starts off, be subject for the Lord's sake to every human institution. And then he lists, okay, you got emperors, you got governors. What does that mean to be subject to every human institution? And that puts us in, right there, it can be a struggle for Christians to figure out how to go about this. I mean, take the COVID issue. That was a difficult one. You know, at least at the beginning. What do we do? And slowly but surely, you know, we came to a more firm approach as a group of Christians and as individual Christians. What should we do? And even now you have, I mean, been to the doctor lately? Anybody been to a doctor lately?
Yes.
Do you still have to wear a mask?
No.
Every one I've been in, I still have to wear a mask. My neurologist still requires it.
None of mine have.
None of yours have. Well, I haven't been to my neurologist in what now? Probably 3.5 months. But the last time I was there, I had to wear a mask. And, you know, that stems all the way back to the CDC telling us to put our masks on. And it was part of what we had to do.
Here's the thing about the CDC. It may be a, quote, government institution, but it has no legal power.
Right, I understand. And that's where the struggle is. You know, it gets even more complicated than that, because what do you do, for example, I mean, he lists here 2 separate human institutions, right? The emperor, and then you have governors. Now, we don't have that exact same setup here. What do we have? We have a federal government, and then we have state governments.
Which was established by the people to do the will of the people.
Right, and then we have local governments.
Brandon's will.
Right. So now you have federal, state. I'm not trying to get into a political discussion. I'm just trying to show you how
Well, this inevitably gets into a political discussion.
it does. You're right. Which one of these fits with the emperor that's listed here?
An emperor would be federal.
Yeah. And see, I disagree completely with that. Because I don't think the states probably come the closest.
States established the federal government.
Right.
Therefore, they are superior under our Constitution.
Under our Constitution.
Our law.
Right. So we have an institution, we have a human institution, and things are backwards right now in this human institution that we have. Wade's right, according to the Constitution, all power is delegated, or not delegated, power is delegated to
Only certain powers are delegated to the
right.
federal government.
Everything else belongs to the state, according to the Constitution. But things
So if
were...
we don't have a constitution, we don't have a legal government.
That's all true. But the reality is all of this is flipped on its head. And my point is it puts Christians in a difficult situation. Because I think most Christians do look at the president as being the equivalent of the emperor here. And then states are governors. But the real difficulty for us as Christians is when what this says conflicts with what this says, and still both of those conflict with what this says. And we have that going on rampantly throughout the United States, right? Here's another example. How many cities are there, which is local, that have declared themselves sanctuary cities? I mean, I can think of 12 major ones off the top of my head. And yet there's a federal law.
Do they have the power to do that, though?
Right.
Does the state delegate to them that power? Answer, no.
The answer is no, but they're still doing it.
Yeah, well, if they don't have a right to tell you to do something, they don't have a right to compel you to comply with that.
Right, except then they do use And I mean, granted, it's an abuse of authority, but they still use it to force compliance. Now, you can say, well, we have legal recourse, and that's true.
No, we don't have legal recourse anymore.
Right, but we don't. So, so are we still really under this form of government anymore? I mean,
No, we're under a dictatorship.
right, so then the reality is, we get back to the common understanding of who's the emperor in this scenario. So all of this, you see, puts the Christian in a difficult situation, trying to figure out, okay, who am I to be subject to? How am I to be subject to him? If my governor says, hey, no masks are required, keep everything open, but my president says the opposite, I feel compelled to go with the government because of my understanding of the Constitution and how it lays out the authority. But not every Christian has that same thought. It's a real struggle, and it puts us in a conscience situation where we're trying to figure out how to go about doing what James implores us to do. But I think the real underlying thing is that be subject. And in fact, if you go into the Greek,
Pardon me for interrupting.
Mhm.
The reason for the establishment of governments are to punish those who do evil,
Right.
praise those who do good.
that is the reason for the establishment of government. And here's the reality, that does take place even when you have a corrupt government. Now, a government can abuse its authority in myriads of ways,
Like punishing those who do good.
like punishing those who do good and rewarding those who do evil. And we see that taking place regularly these days. But it's still, well, as James says it here, or to governors as those sent by him to punish those who do evil and praise those who do good. For this is the will of God, that by doing good you should put to silence the ignorance of foolish people. Who are the foolish people? The Bible tells us who the foolish people are. It's always the same. It's those
who are unbelievers.
yeah, those who act like there is no God, right?
Yes.
And so we are still supposed to go about doing good. And here's how this conflict gets resolved. Because who gets to define what doing good is? Does the government get to define what doing good is for the Christian? And the answer to that question is
God defines that.
huh?
God
defines what doing good is. So all of this becomes not irrelevant, but it becomes simplified when we remember that the doing good is as God defines it, not as the emperor defines it or as the governors define it. And then then it's like, oh, okay, now I see a better approach. Now, that doesn't mean we're free to willy-nilly go about saying, okay, I'm not wearing a mask, I don't care what the government says. So there's still a struggle there. But the simplicity of it is most of our life doesn't actually revolve around how much the government what kind of burdens the government is laying on us. Most of our life doesn't. The reality is, I still do pretty much the same things that I've always done, even as our government has gotten more and more bureaucratic, and tries to become more and more heavy-handed. And believers in Jesus' day did the same thing. I mean, right? They still walked from Galilee to Judea, and Jesus still carried on his ministry and lived his life Now, he paid his taxes when the government required him to pay taxes. He subjected himself to both to the Sanhedrin. When they came to arrest him, he didn't say, hey, you don't have any grounds to do this. And then when Pilate questioned him, he didn't tell Pilate, you don't have any authority over me. Actually, he said the opposite. You do have authority over me, but it came to you from above. And even to Herod, I mean, he didn't perform some great miracle to stop Herod from bringing him over to his palace. He still went along with it. Now, he didn't answer the questions because that wouldn't be doing the good that he knows God requires. Okay? So, we can still be subject to the institutions even when they are corrupted. And here's that's another reality we have to come to terms with. Is there a human institution that isn't corrupted? No. Which is kind of, to those who understand the United States Constitution, that's part of the beauty of it, really, isn't it? It's written with that knowledge in mind that every human institution is corrupted. So if you're gonna look for an institution, a human institution that's not corrupted so that you can be obedient to it, you'll never, and that makes James's words nonsensical. So James himself is also aware that human institutions are corrupted and corruptible. I mean, he's living under the Roman government and under the Jewish government at this point. He's well aware of it, but he still says, hey, be subject to those institutions. So these are God's representatives, and here, this is where what Wade brought up already. What are the primary purposes of those representatives of God? This is the function of government, as God defines it. And Paul says the same thing, right? The king he bears the sword for a reason.
Yeah.
And that reason is to punish evildoers and then to praise those who do good. And it's interesting when you read how James, or how Paul writes about it. Paul writes about it as though that is actually happening even under the government under which he lived. So we can say, yeah, that's what they're supposed to do, but that's not what they do. But that's not how Paul speaks. Paul says that is what he's doing. And even in a corrupt government, they still do that. And so that's the part of government that we are for, is when wickedness is kept in check through force of law. Now, will there not be times then that we'll get punished for doing good? And the answer is yes. And the Bible is perfectly upfront about that. Jesus himself is perfectly upfront about that. That if they hated me, they're going to hate you too. So, but the primary purpose of government, as God establishes it, is to punish the evil and praise those who do good.
Yeah, well, we used to have a pastor over at Sola Fide who every 4th of July would get up in the pulpit and tell us that we absolutely had to obey every diktat of the government, but never explain any of this. It was just a blanket. You got to.
Yeah, I wouldn't say that.
Well.
There's obviously.
By the way, he was eventually removed from the ministry and put into he was someplace where he couldn't do as much damage.
I see.
in the Wisconsin Senate.
Well, there's some things that we recognize that the government does have, well, I hate to get too specific, but may as well since we're on the subject, we recognize here at Zion that we've got certain requirements we're gonna have to abide by. That, maybe 30, 40 years ago, we wouldn't have had to.
Yeah.
But as long as it doesn't contradict what the Bible says, it doesn't change the fact that it's something that we should still follow. Even if it's not like how it used to be and rules are more strict, as long as it's not contradicting.
Yeah, right, I agree with what you're saying. If it doesn't contradict what God tells us. The hard part for me personally is trying to figure out what is our form of government right now. I mean, what is it really? What is the government that God has established over us right now? Is it a dictatorship? Because that's what, in a sense, we're living under. It certainly isn't a representative republic anymore that we're living under.
Oh, I got wrecked by Lincoln.
Right. Yeah, we can go back further. Yep.
Maybe we are under a dictatorship, but they're not taking away any of our religion rights. We shouldn't have a problem with it being what it is.
Well, even if they do, I mean, James and the early Christians were living under one where their religious rights were taken away. But they recognize, okay, there's some things we can obey and some things we can't. Peter and John, right away, not long after Pentecost, they were told to quit preaching in the name of Jesus. And Peter says, which one are we to obey, you or God?
God.
Right. So in that situation, it's easy. I'm going to go one step a little bit deeper here. This explains the dilemma I feel as a Christian, not just as a citizen of the United States, but as a Christian.
You gotta remember, we're both.
We're both, right. But this particular question, I can become a citizen of any other country and the question still remains. What does the Christian do when another nation comes in and takes over? And it's obviously that that other government that has come in and taken over is now at least quasi-established. To whom do I now owe my subjection?
I would say you'd still own your subjection to your original country because it'd be the other country that envied what you have, stole from your country, which is, in this case, you are.
So how many years do you owe that? And at what point does it go away?
When that country doesn't exist.
And who gets to decide when that country doesn't exist? See what I'm saying? I'm just saying that my point is that Christians, this is not just so cut and simple as the government said it, therefore do it on the one hand, and it's not so simple on the other hand, that I can say I've got it all figured out and everybody should do it the way I said to do it. Right? And that's part of the struggle here.
Yeah. Chuck says I'm
Well-
governing by the power of the purse.
Governing by the power of the purse. Well, that's another aspect of it. Paul mentions that too. For this reason, you also pay taxes. It's a struggle. That's my only point is, and we all have our opinions as to how it will show itself. But ultimately, where it comes down, and here's James' point, you go about doing good. And you know what doing good is, because you have 10 commandments that spell it out for you. And if you abide by those laws, a lot of the, because here's the funny thing about man's law. You know, we it's funny, but it's not funny. Every time man establishes a law, he establishes a contradiction. Right? Laws don't make laws don't make more obedient people. Laws make more disobedient people. And we can never, this is the old saying, you can't legislate morality. That's true. But you know what you can legislate?
Punishment.
Immorality.
Yeah,
You can legislate punishment too, right?
they've certainly legislated immorality in this country.
Right, and that's what
Which may be one reason why we're being visited with a dictatorship.
right, that's why man's laws tend to corrupt things more and more. And so the more convoluted the legal backbone of a society is, the more Christians have to wrestle with these kinds of questions. Wait.
Christ told the Pharisees to render unto Caesar's that which is Caesar's, and unto God that which is God's. Which brings up the question, what is Caesar's?
Well, the particular object that he was talking about at that point was the coin.
Taxes.
Right. If Caesar prints it, Caesar can take it. And that's the system we're living under, right? We're living under an economic, and this touches on what Chuck texted about. We're living under an economic system that is controlled by a human institution. And if we're gonna trade in it, then we have to recognize that. Now, it's not always that way, is it? I mean, you can look back in history, even in our own history, where the government wasn't so heavily involved in the financial aspect of the nation. It's just as it became more involved and people transitioned over into it, well, now we're under it. So what are you going to do? Not pay your taxes? Good luck with that. Because then you don't have God on your side or the government on your side. Anyways, by doing good, you should put to silence the ignorance of foolish people. How does doing good put them to silence? I mean, on the surface, it almost sounds like he's saying.
Well, it deprives them of a moral leg to stand on.
It deprives them of a moral leg to stand on, right? So it's not that they don't fabricate a leg to stand on.
No,
they have a wooden leg to stand on, right? But not a moral leg to stand on. And so the reality, but you think about Jesus again, and don't get me wrong, I'm not one of those, what would Jesus do that, because one, we can't think as clearly as Jesus could, because he thought perfectly. He had the exact right responses to the Sanhedrin. He had the exact perfect responses to Pilate. And every time the Pharisees or the Sadducees, who were part of the ruling class, tried to trap him, he always had the perfect answer. And we can't do that, but we can strive for that, to answer in a good way, like Peter and John did. You can't say Peter and John's answer was a perfect answer because they're not perfect people, but it was a godly answer. And we can do that. We can give godly answers. We can do godly things. And one of the godly things to do is to submit, like Jesus did. Peter and John didn't draw their sword. I mean, they did in the Garden of Gethsemane, but they didn't after Pentecost. They didn't draw their swords and say, hey, you're not taking me in because God gave me this job to do. Okay, so this goes on to verse 16. Live as people who are free. Now that's a buzzword for us, isn't it? Live as people who are free. What does it mean to be free? What is the freedom that he's talking about here? Because the early Christians didn't have any expectation of the kind of freedom that we think about here in the United States. They didn't have, the Bill of Rights and all the amendments. I mean, they had some things like, hey, if you're a Roman citizen, you can't just be beaten, even though that happened to Paul. You have to have a trial before you can be punished in the Roman system. If you were a Roman citizen.
It's more of a spiritual freedom, I'd say.
Okay, you're right. I want to go a little bit further than that. I'm going to say this is actually the real freedom. Every other kind of freedom is a facade, or at best, a dim reflection of the greater freedom.
Well, by freedom, I don't think he means license to do what you will.
Right, and that's what, in our day, people talk about our right to this, our right to that, our right to, and everything's a right nowadays.
Yeah.
And nobody understands what the word right means. What does the word right mean? Everybody thinks it means I'm free to do this thing, or I'm free to have this thing. But the original use of the word right means it's actually right, right? For example, the right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Pursuit of happiness, we'll talk, I'm not going to go down that, but it certainly isn't to do whatever makes your sinful nature happy. It never was intended that way.
That was just flowery language.
Yeah, but the right
People wrote that way back
to
then.
life and liberty, what does that mean? It means it's right because God's the one who gave you your life. So it's right for you to have it. It's not wrong for you to preserve your life. Your possessions, God's the one who gives you the strength to get them. Therefore, it's right for you to have them, which means it's wrong for me to take them from you. That's what a right is. But nowadays, everybody's like, well, I got a right to marry whoever I want. I got a right to health care. I got a right to abortion. I got a right to, go down the list. That's the wrong use of the word right there. And it, like Wade said before, it's flipping, punishing the good, or it's making it punishing the good and rewarding the evil. So when we talk about freedom, it's not this political secular concept. This freedom, live as people who are free. Well, what are we free from? We're free from our sin. We're free from the fear of death. We're free from the torments of hell. We're free from slavery to sin. That's the freedom we have as believers. And so James says, okay, now live like people who are free from those things, even if you live in the most oppressive government that exists. And I think, personally, as much as I wouldn't want it, I think that Christians that are in more oppressive systems of government, or under more oppressive systems of government, probably have an easier time really comprehending all of this that James is talking about here. Because they know they still are obliged to do what their government requires of them, and yet they still have this freedom of knowing that, whatever the government does to me, in the end, it's not going to matter, because I have one who is supreme over me, and that's Christ. And under Christ, I'm not living under oppression. I'm living under the freedom of grace and forgiveness and life and salvation and peace and love and all of those things. That's what really governs me. And so he says, don't use your freedom, that freedom that Christ gives you, as a cover-up for evil. In other words, well, this goes back to hey, since God's going to forgive me, I should just go ahead and do it, right? Should sin abound all the more so grace can abound all the more? And both James and Paul said, no, that's not the approach the Christian takes. But living as servants of God. And the word servants there, I think it's funny. I mean, it's probably a product of our national mentality that we don't like to use the word slave. But this word servant here, don't think of a person who's coming and bringing.
He wasn't drawing wages.
He wasn't drawing wages, right? This servant is a slave. So live as slaves of God. You have the most gracious master. And you are bound to him now. So again, don't use the modern concept, just like you don't with freedom. Don't do that with the word servant here. Every time you see the word servant in your Bible, it doesn't matter which version, which translation you're using, King James all the way through all of them, they all tend to go servant, 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 servant. And
Because it was understood then that meant slave.
back in King James day, you're right. And nowadays it doesn't, right? Most people don't see that. You're either a slave to sin or you're a slave to Christ. It's one or the other. One is a slavery to death. The other is a slavery to life. And so to summarize everything that he's talking about, maybe, or to simplify it, here's what he says in verse 17. Honor everyone, right? What does it mean to honor? What is honor?
Respect.
Okay, respect.
Honor is, it's deeper than respect.
It is deeper.
It's more of, I don't know, showing who you are versus seeing who somebody else is.
I think perhaps the best way of thinking of honor is to treat everyone as though they're a little bit higher up than you.
Not even just higher up, just
give
everybody else is
defer to them, give them the preference.
Yeah.
Which is the exact opposite. A lot of these things, it's like holy, right? What does it mean to be holy? Say it.
Do we, or
No, what does the word holy mean? What's the classic definition for holy? If you're holy, you have no sin, right? So we take the opposite to try and understand the positive. And we kind of have to do that here with honor too, because it's so contrary to our nature. Honor, what's the opposite of honoring? Well, what comes natural to us? Natural is to elevate ourselves. And so it's interesting that James doesn't just, he does say it at the end, honor the emperor, but he starts off by saying honor everyone. So don't elevate yourself over anyone. Love the brotherhood. So now he takes the broad. So show respect, deference, high regard for everyone. Love the brotherhood. Remember, you're in a fellowship. You're in a oneness with other Christians. That doesn't mean you shouldn't love everyone else. In fact, some commentators believe the brotherhood here may mean the brotherhood of humanity in this context. I don't think that.
I think the brotherhood is more.
I don't get that out of the context either.
Well, the only reason is because he's talking about how Christians live in a structured, however well-structured is irrelevant, under a structured society. Therefore, the brotherhood of man is the way some. I agree with you. I don't take it that way, but it's possible.
What I saw from it was, like, brotherhood is those you fight next to. Like, in those times, the people that you go to battle with, those are your brotherhood.
Well, I mean, that's a good way of thinking about it. I still tend to think of it as, okay, we're talking about our Christian fellowship here.
Yeah.
So your brothers in Christ.
Right.
Yeah.
And the reason I take it is because of this next one, fear God. Right? And this kind of reflects Jesus' words. Okay, don't fear the one who can kill you. There's another one you should fear. The one who, after he's killed you, can throw you into hell. That's the one you fear. Okay? And so that sets it off from honor the emperor. Okay? As you're fearing God, part of your fear of God is to remember the emperor, the government, however corrupt. Because, right? I mean, the emperor at the time of James's writing this wasn't some great guy that everybody just wanted to serve. Especially Christians. I mean, they could see how wicked the emperor was. So he says, even while you're fearing God, remember to honor the emperor. Now, Old King James and New King James has a different translation here than emperor. Do you know what the translation is? Honor the king. And then the question that many commentators have on that, and they're divided, is which king are we talking about?
Was it Herod?
Or was it Christ?
You should honor both, but you should honor Christ above the other.
Right, but which one is James talking about here? With that last statement, honor the emperor. The older.
I think he's already covered Christ there. He says, fear God.
Right. I agree. I think he is going back to, okay, we have a very straightforward approach here. Honor everyone, right? Now love the brotherhood.
And in the rest of Scripture,
Now fear
we're
God.
always told to fear God.
Always told to fear God, right?
Are we ever told to honor God in the same way that we would honor our superiors on earth?
Off the top of my head, I'm thinking of some of the things in the book of Revelation where honor, power, might, glory, dominion, but I can't think of a command to do so. So that's kind of, I don't know the answer to your question. We do have a lot of passages that say fear God. But off the top of my head, I can't think of one that tells us to honor. Although, I don't know. I think part of fearing God is honoring Him. But we do have to be, I think this is what James is doing, is saying, look, you have to come to terms with the fact that whatever government you have is God's representative. How well he does at doing that, he's answerable to God for. But how well you honor God's representative, you have to answer for. Right? And that's where, I think that's the best place to leave it, is when we're living under a corrupt government, and again, every government's going to be corrupt. I hope that doesn't come as a shock to anyone. You still owe honor because he's God's representative. Questions, comments? Sticky situation. Like I said, it's not always easy for Christians to figure it all out as they live day to day, but what simplifies it for us is that to remember the one we owe fear to is God, and then remember God has some representatives that he's appointed over us. All right, I'm going to stop there.
Traffic busy out there?